Okay, in this section, we're going to be talking about layers, how to create a multi-layered document inside of Photoshop. Now, layers can be a little bit intimidating to a lot of new students, but we're going to try to ease that intimidation factor by taking you through very quickly just the basics of layers. After we're done with just showing you the basics, we're going to actually create kind of a studio effect and use our ducky image that we're so proud of to create this particular image. We're going to be using the layers panel a lot, and as you can see in here, I have a number of different layers. Don't let this confuse you. By the time we're done with this, you should have a really good understanding of what all this is. But as you can see, I have used a number of different layers to create this just ducky image. Before we get into creating this, I want to take you through the basics. So I'm going to shut this down for right now and create a new image that we can kind of play around with. I'm going to use the old default Photoshop size, but just change this to 8 by 10 so we have a really big image to work with. And I'm going to leave it at the RGB color, red, green, blue spectrum, and I'm going to make my contents white. Click OK to that. Now we have a nice big image that we can use. Let's look over at the layers palette here and take a look at what we can see so far. We have one layer that's filled with white that's called our background layer. Currently, right now, it's locked. We're going to get into some of these icons a little bit later on, but let's take a look at what we've got. We've got a background layer. We've got some strange icons. If I wanted to create a new layer that would happen go above the background layer, let's take a look at some of these icons down here underneath the layers palette. There's a small icon of a piece of paper with a dog ear that has the tooltip create a new layer. If I click on that, I've created a brand new layer right above background. It's called layer 1. This layer right now has nothing in it. We can't see anything visible on our screen, so let's go ahead and fill this layer with something. You see these checkered patterns? This indicates to me that there are no pixels currently on this layer. It's completely blank.
So a layer is kind of like a clear piece of plastic paper, maybe?
You know when you were in high school and the teacher used the overhead projector and he would lay different layers of those transparencies one on top of each other?
Right.
The same concept holds true for Photoshop layers. Let's go ahead and fill this real quick so we can get an example of what we're talking about here. I'm going to use the gradient tool and use one of those presets that you just showed us about. I'm going to use the copper preset and create a gradient on layer 1. Notice that the blue is on layer 1. This means this is the selected layer. As
Gotcha.
I click and drag, I'm creating a gradient. And now my layer 1 has been filled with that gradient. Well, the background layer is still there. It's just underneath layer 1, very similar to that transparency analogy I just used. Like with the high school professor. He lays things one over the top of another, and it blocks whatever is underneath it.
Gotcha.
Let me go one step further. Now that we have layer 1, I'm going to create a new layer, again, by clicking on this little new layer icon. Now, I created a new layer this way last time, so I'm going to show you a different way to do it. Go up to the Layer menu and choose New Layer, or if you wanted to use Shift-Control-N, does the same thing. I'm going to click on this. This time I'm going to be presented with a dialog box that allows me to, if I want to, name my layer at this point. So I'm going to do this and call it Box because that's actually the shape that I'm going to be creating, and say OK. It creates a brand new layer above layer 1 and names it Box for me. Again, we have transparencies. There's nothing in it. So I'm going to grab my selection tool and make a rectangular selection. I'm going to fill this with color. We've already talked about how we can grab colors, so I'm going to go ahead and bump up my green to a value of 255, which is all total green. See my layer there? And then I'm going to fill it. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way by going to the Edit, Fill, and choosing my foreground color from the pop-up menu and saying OK, which fills my selection area with green, as you can see in the box. Now notice that outside of this green box, I still have transparent pixels, or basically it's blank. There's nothing out here. I'm going to deselect that selection. Everything that becomes transparent, or where that checker box is, we can see through to the layer underneath it, right?
Right.
Now layers are kind of entities in and of themselves. We can modify layers without affecting anything else underneath it or other layers. Let me give you an example of that. If I go over to my Move tool, while my box layer is selected, I can move that box around. I can edit this box as well by grabbing maybe a selection, grabbing a corner of it, and hitting delete. I haven't touched my layer 1 or my background. Only the box layer is affected. I'm going to delete that. Actually, I'm going to undo that and get my box back. One more time to make this illustration a little bit more apparent, I'm going to create yet another layer, but I'm going to do it in a different fashion. Over here, remember that all of the palettes have their own options to them, and they all have their own menu. I'm going to click on that little circle and come down to New Layer. It does the same thing and brings up the same dialog box, and in this time, I'm going to call it Face. I'm going to say OK to that, and it creates a new layer once again. Always creating a layer above the one that's previously selected. Let's say, oops, I don't want to do that. I'm going to drag the face down to the trash can. This is going to delete a layer. If I want to get rid of this thing, I'm going to click on it, hold it, and drag it down to this little icon of a trash can next to the Create New Layer. Once I release, that layer is history. It's gone. I'm going to select on layer 1 this time, and I'm going to go back over here and create New Layer and name it Face again. When I say OK, notice this time it wasn't created above box, it was created underneath box. That was because I had layer 1 selected, and new layers always get created above the layer that was previously selected. I'm going to use a brush tool and give it a different color. This time, let's give it a value of all blue, 0 red, 0 green. So I'm going to get a brush stroke that's blue. I'm going to paint for just a second here, and as you can see, nothing is happening. Okay? Actually, we are painting.
Something really is happening,
but
though, right?
something is happening, but not visually. I do this to illustrate that my face layer is underneath box. I have pixels on the box layer that are hiding everything underneath it. My face, actually, you can see that the pixels have been laid down. Let me grab this face so that I can illustrate how to move layers around in a scene. I'm going to click on the face, drag it by clicking and holding with my mouse button, and drag it above the box layer.
You get that really sharp black line in between the
anywhere
layer
I
there,
want to
too.
drop that, yeah, you get this double line, and as we use more and more layers, it'll become really apparent as well. Now you can see the pixels that I painted down are above the box layer. I think that's made pretty apparent by this time. I'm painting pixels into a layer. They're above the box so that I can actually see them. If I create a little smiley face like this and make something silly, you can see that face is above box, which the face, since it's selected, can be manipulated by itself. Switch over to the Move tool, and I can move those pixels on that layer independently of the box. Okay?
Gotcha.
Well, what if my face and my box are part of one overall image, and I've positioned my face right where I want them to be, and the box needs to go with the face if I was going to move it into the upper right-hand corner. I can actually lock these layers by selecting in this little area next to the box, and when I do, I get the little icon of a lock, an indication of a link. Now, the face and the box is locked together. If I select the box, I can see that the face is linked. Actually, I should use the word linked. I'm saying locked, but this is actually a linking. Okay? So these two layers are linked. If I grab the Move tool now and try to move the face around, the box goes for the ride. Cool?
Right on.
Let's talk about visibility for just a second. Sometimes I might need to temporarily turn off a layer so that I can see what's underneath it. If I wanted to turn off the visibility of face, see this little eyeball, the little Photoshop icon? This indicates the layer's visibility. Clicking on that turns off the visibility of that layer alone, leaving everything else underneath. If I wanted to turn off the box, I click on its visibility, and now we see layer 1. Okay?
Gotcha.
I think that's a good enough introduction.
It's pretty cool how they link together, and you can move them separately or move them together just by linking in that one little box.
Correct. And
now
I can
you
take...
only made one link, though. Does that automatically link the top one? above it or everything above it?
It's actually going to link from whatever you select to the new layer that you click that linking. As we get into more layers, it'll become apparent, but let me show you how, let's say the box and the face is currently linked. I've selected on box, and I can see all the layers that are linked to box. If I want to link the layer 1 or a gradient to the same thing, all I have to do is come down to layer 1, click that link, and now all 3 layers are going to go along for the ride. They're all linked together.
Now, what if you just wanted to link the face and the copper?
If I wanted to link the face and the layer 1, I would remove the link from box. Now face is linked only to layer 1, and if I reverse this, layer 1 is only linked to face.
Okay.
Good. So now just the face and the gradient go together, leaving box alone. But the stacking order is very important, as well as the visibility. So if I move face underneath box, box is going to hide the face. Okay?
See.
So now that we've got this basic concept out of the way, let's go ahead and try creating more of a studio production or studio concept of what a real image with lots of different layers would be like.
Here comes Ducky.
Here comes Ducky. We just can't get enough of Ducky. This is the image that I want to create. I'm going to delete or kill this other image off back here. This is the layer that I want to create, or the image I want to create with all of these multiple layers. Let's start going through step by step how I do that. I'm going to close this image, just wanted to show it to you, and I'm going to create a new image from the new image dialog box, and I'm going to call this just Ducky. Okay? Once again, I'm going to use these cool new presets and go 8 by 10, but I'm going to drop my resolution down to 72. I really like using RGB for on-screen presentation, so I'm leaving that alone, leaving the contents white and saying OK.
So the contents white just means it's going to be the background color.
What's that?
The contents, you can either have it white, black, or transparent. Just really means what color the background is going to be, correct?
Right. Good point, Gump. It's going to fill this background color with the white. Now, as you can see, the background color, or the background layer, is italics. The background layer is special. There's some things you can do with it, and there's some things you can't do with it. That can be a pain, and there's ways to cheat the background layer, but for this VTM, we're not going to get into that. What I want to do first of all is to create a new layer. Click the dog-eared new layer icon. That's the best, easiest way to do it. And until I get a blank new layer, right? I'm going to come over here, grab my gradient tool, and now I need special colors. I want for my foreground color to be a light blue. That's a good light blue, I think. And I need my background to be black. So I'm going to choose black. Of course, I can use my swatches for that as well. And just to make sure I've got 100% black, I'm going to click on that. Oops. I just killed off my foreground
Lost your blue color there.
There. Got it back. So I've got blue and black. I'm going to make a gradient that's circular in nature. Thank you. Radial gradient. And I'm going to start in the middle for where my foreground starts and shift drag down to help myself come up with a, you know what? This is the problem with presets. I had still been on my original copper. What I really wanted to do was go back over and choose my foreground to background gradient. Let's try that one more time with that selected, and I'm going to undo what I just did. In the middle, shift, drag. That's almost what I want, but it's backwards. I'm going to do that one more time, but this time I'm going to take the reverse check mark off. I think Gump was playing with my tools here, and I'm all mixed up.
Oopsie daisy.
Here you go. This is more of what I was looking for. So you see we've got background is white. Layer 1 fills all the pixels so we can't see any of the background. That's what I want. Now, I'm going to try to make this studio appearance so that we have a shelf and we've got kind of this light that's creating a blue area on a wall behind a shelf. Here's how I might do this. I'm going to take layer 1 and I'm going to name this real quick. There's a number of different ways of naming, and I showed you how to create a new layer and name it at the same time. But if you simply double click on layer 1, it'll highlight and we can name this studio.
So you actually clicked on the text there,
Clicking
I noticed.
right on the text, and it will come up and you can rename this thing and hit enter and it'll be done. What I want to do is I want to duplicate this layer. See, I don't have to always create new layers. I can duplicate existing layers by clicking it and dragging it down to that create new icon. When I do, I get an exact duplicate of the original, and it's just called copy. So I'm going to double click in here and call this shelf. So we've got two layers that are sitting on top of each other in the exact space, right? I'm going to open up my window just a little bit to give myself more room to work, and I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to select the top 2/3 of this shelf layer, make a selection, and then what I want to do is I want to delete all the pixels in between this bounding box. So I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard, and now it's gone. Nothing real visual happened on screen, but if you look over at your shelf layer here, you can see that I've actually deleted all the pixels that were in there one time. So I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'm going to move the shelf down just a hair. See how that works?
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. I just wanted to remind everybody that when you want to duplicate a layer as well, you can also right-click and go to duplicate, and you'll get another layer as well.
What Gump is referring to is if you right-click, you can say duplicate layer, and it's the same thing as clicking and dragging onto this icon. Very good workflow tip. Yeah, the nice thing about Photoshop is there's always about 4 ways to do every one thing, and everybody gets into their own little pattern. So we try to introduce as many as we possibly can. Something I want to illustrate here about this shelf layer is we have part of our layer is filled with pixels, and the other part is filled with nothing. Just to help us illustrate this to you, I'm going to pull this layer menu out here and go down to the palette options. Palette options opens an option dialog box where we can change the thumbnail size of these layers to something a little bit more large that we can actually take a good look at. I think we can all see that now. The shelf layer has transparent areas as well as pixels. These buttons up here, the locking, these are helpful to make sure that we don't accidentally change our layers by painting over certain areas or moving them at all. If I go ahead and lock down my transparent section of that layer, nothing I do, whether it be painting or editing at all, is going to affect this portion of the layer. I can still mess up the bottom portion, but I just can't touch my transparent areas. I'm going to undo that.
So it's just locking the transparent area of that layer.
And you can actually see that by that little icon over there that has the lock. Next to that is the lock the image pixels. This is basically doing the same thing as the transparent, but it also locks the actual image pixels itself. And as a matter of fact, I can't even use my brush now. All I get is a little icon that says, nope, sorry. Next to that, I'm going to deselect these for just a second. If I grab my move tool, I can move my shelf around, right? I'm going to put that right back where it was and hit this lock the position. Once I mash down that position, I can't move that layer at all. Okay? Oh, it even gives me could not complete your request because the layer is locked. How convenient. I'm going to say OK to that. And then, of course, if I wanted to lock it, I could still paint on it, right? I can still paint on the transparent sections, only the locking position. Using all 3 of them in tandem really locks the layer down tight. That's why they gave us this one button here, lock everything. We hit the lock everything. Now we can't paint on it. Now we can't move it. It's a locked layer.
No more playing around, huh?
No more playing around with that layer. You know what? I know that this is going to be in its final position as well as the studio. So just to make sure I don't accidentally move it, I'm going to hit the lock for that one, select the studio, and hit the lock for that one. Okay?
Gotcha.
Good. Let's start creating some more layers then. Of course, we have our visibility control. I'm going to open up the Ducky image. We all love Ducky so much, and he's such a good example. So I'm going to close this layer down a little bit, get Ducky. What I want to do is bring Ducky into my image without all the white pixels. I demonstrated this before, so let's quickly go through that and do it again. I'm going to grab the magic wand tool, select all the white pixels, and then I'm going to choose Select Inverse, or Shift-Control-I. Use my Move tool and pull him straight over to my other image. Now, this is a good example of where things get introduced, where new layers are created.
So you had the studio layer chosen before you pulled the Ducky over there, right?
Correct. And all new layers are created above the one that was selected, right? This isn't a problem because we can easily reorder our layers by grabbing Ducky and moving him above the shelf. No problems there. I'm going to close out Ducky there, say no, I don't want to save him. And let's talk about how we can transform layers, because Ducky is a little bit big. We want to shrink him down a little bit. So let's go up to our Edit Transform area. We have all sorts of transform options, and I encourage you to get in here and play with some of the scale, rotate, skew, distort, and perspective. They're a lot of fun. I don't need all that much control. I'm just going to use the free transform, which gives me the ability to rotate and size. I'm going to grab on the end, one of the corners, and hold down my shift so that I can constrain it as I size it down to the ratio that it was. I'm going to put him right in the middle by clicking in the middle and moving him.
So if you didn't hold shift...
If I didn't hold shift, I could really warp Ducky out.
Oh, I see.
Okay? So what I wanted to do was hold shift so I constrained him to the ratio that he is.
Gotcha.
When I'm done, I can either hit Enter on the keyboard or simply double-click inside to end that transformation. Now, I don't like to leave things just unnamed, so I'm going to go ahead and double-click in Layer 1 and call him Ducky. We're beginning to get the effect that we're wanting. Our final image, though, is this. We can see that Ducky is on the studio table with the shelf, but he has a shadow. So let's talk about how we can create that shadow. Inside Photoshop, layers can have effects. They're a lot of fun. There's a number of different effects, and those can be found underneath here. These are called layer effects, and this little F icon, clicking on that will bring up a menu of all sorts of different types of effects we can create. Drop shadows, bevel and emboss, pattern overlays, you name it, we've got it. I'm going to choose Drop Shadow to bring up the layer effect or the layer styles dialog box, and this thing is quite large but has a lot of power. Let me show you how to create a drop shadow. As soon as I clicked on it, you can see that there's a dark edge around Ducky. The drop shadow has already been started to be created. If I increase the distance, which is now 5 pixels by moving the slider, I'm moving that shadow away from Ducky, which makes him look like he's standing out a little bit. Now, this is kind of I'm doing something a little bit different, but I'm going to show you how to create a drop shadow, and then I'm going to do something really wacky to the drop shadow. But I can increase the spread of this and the size of this to give it more of a diffused look. What I'm looking for is a real diffused drop shadow, so I think that's pretty much going to do it for me. I might drop the size down, drop the spread down, or yeah, I think that's going to do it for me. But we have all sorts of different types of things we can do. We can, including different blending modes, which we've hinted at before. We're going to come back to that as well. But we can put inner shadows, outer glows on all these layers. Please come in here and play with these. I can't possibly demonstrate everything, but right now I just want to show you the drop shadow and hit OK to that. Let's look at what happened to my layer. The Ducky layer now has a new icon next to it as the layer style, the little F. And underneath it, it gives me the effect, the drop shadow. Remember those icons, the visibility icons? I can turn on and off the effects and watch what happens. And I can add multiple effects to any layer. Like I can go now add a bevel and emboss or a color overlay. And they will all be added underneath this effects. And you can turn all the effects off at one time by clicking on the effects visibility. Or individual effects one at a time by clicking on their own visibility icons.
So if you had 6 different effects underneath that little effect area, you could turn them all off by choosing that effect or just one at a time?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Nice.
Yes. But you know what? These are fun for effects, but I really like this drop shadow, and I want to use it by itself. But I can't do that because Ducky is attached to that drop shadow, and the drop shadow is attached to Ducky. If I move him around, the drop shadow is going to go with. I want to show you a way where you can pull out that drop shadow and use it as its own layer. You would do this by right-clicking, and that's the key. Right-click on that drop shadow itself. Whoops, I double-click. And choose Create Layer. It's almost all the way at the bottom. Create Layer. What this does is it's going to take that drop shadow and make it in its own layer. Some aspects of the effect cannot be reproduced with layers. Ignore that. In fact, just never show me that again. I know what it does. Now we have the drop shadow as its own layer underneath Ducky. Good. We can turn on and off its own visibility, and we can move it around like it move that around, and it's its own layer. Good. Now, in order to create a shadow, we've got a light source in the back. We want to create that shadow coming out as a underneath Ducky. I can transform a little bit more. We talked about the free transform, but let's take a look under the transform menu, under the edit. We have a couple other options, flip horizontally and flip vertically. I'm going to flip vertically this entire layer. So now we have the shadow of Ducky upside down. Grabbing my move tool again, I'm going to move that shadow underneath Ducky. Kind of like that. Now it looks like he's kind of casting a shadow on that shelf. Good?
Looks pretty nice.
It does, except this doesn't look very realistic. He's too bright underneath here. He's casting a shadow, but he's looking too bright, right? We can go ahead and fix that a little bit, but before we do, I want to introduce you to a couple more concepts that you can do with the Layers palette. The Layers palette has nice ways of organizing your items into little folders, little directories. We call these in Photoshop, we call these sets, okay? This icon down here under the layer palettes, create new set, looks like a little folder. Go ahead and click that, and we create a set that we can drop things into. I'm going to put this set above the Ducky by clicking and dragging, and I'm going to double click on the set name, and I'm going to call this Ducky Set. I want all of the layers that are specific to Ducky to go into this set. So all I would have to do is click on Ducky, drag him up, and drop him right on the set. You can see that he shifts inside to signify Ducky layer is inside the Ducky set. Notice over here at the Ducky set we have a upside down triangle. By clicking this triangle, it toggles on and off the layers inside that set. I'm going to grab the Ducky drop layer and put him inside as well. So everything that's associated with this set is indented and inside. Cool? I can turn on the entire set's visibility at one fell swoop with this visibility icon, and he's now all gone. Everything inside of Ducky sets, visible, invisible, back and forth.
The sets are really nice. They can really keep you pretty organized throughout your image.
When you're doing a lot of Photoshop, you tend to use layer after layer after layer. It's not uncommon to have 50 layers in an image or more layers. So having these sets really do help organize your workspace and your layers so that you can quickly go to an area and find them. But you know what? You can actually color these layers as well. If you wanted to say, okay, for visibility purposes, I want all the layers that are associated with Ducky to be yellow. Think I can do that? You bet. Let's right-click on one of the layers, like the Ducky layer, go to Layers Property, where I could rename this thing, or I can change its color. Right now I have the color set to none. The drop-down menu gives me a number of preset colors. I'm going to choose yellow because Ducky's yellow. Hit OK, and now you can see the entire layer is yellow. I can easily pick that out in a crowd, right? I mean, I just go, okay, I want all the Ducky layers. Boom, it's yellow. I'm also going to do the same thing to the shadow, make it yellow. Okay?
So if you would have done that too, can you do the same thing with the sets?
Yes, you can.
And
In
it would have
fact,
changed everything inside the set.
Yes, you can. Let me go ahead and do that so you can see that real quick. If I wanted to say instead of yellow, I wanted it to be red, I'm going to go to the layer set properties by right-clicking on the set layer, go up to color, and choose red. When I say OK, everything in that set becomes red. I really do like the yellow, though, because Ducky's yellow. I'm changing it back to yellow. Good. And when I collapse it, now it's just that.
So it doesn't necessarily affect the layers at all. It's just for a visual cue for you, the user that's painting, saying that whatever's in this layer is yellow.
Bingo. You've got it.
Gotcha.
This is specifically for the user and to help them out. Let me go ahead and do one more set, and I'm going to call this Studio Set. Studio Set. And I'm going to drop Shelf, and I'm going to drop, whoops, I missed on the Shelf. I'm going to drop Shelf and Studio inside. Now, notice my Studio is above my Shelf. Even inside sets, I can reorder layers by dragging above and dropping them below, back and forth, like this, okay? And I'm going to give my Studio set a color of blue, because it kind of looks like it. So, here's what we've got so far. Now, hopefully this has been a really good introduction to using layers, and some people would be very complicated. I hope we've made this pretty simplistic, but we're not done yet.
It's pretty clear to me. I like it so far.
Very simple.
Okay, very simple. Good. Let's close down these sets here, and I'm not done with Ducky. Oh, we're coming back to him. But what I want to do is introduce a little bit about text. We have an entire section dedicated to text, so I'm only going to highlight the text section right now. The text tool is this T right here. If I click on that, I'm going to be presented with a number of options in the options box. I want to go ahead, click down, and I'm going to change my color to white. And I'm going to just start typing. Okay. Dookie. D-U-C.
Yeah, I like that too.
Oh, no. All right. Remember, any new layer is going to be created above the one that was selected. So what I'm going to do is drag just Ducky above the duck set so that we can see all of the white pixels. And I'm going to readjust him a little bit more. Okay? I hope that was just a brief introduction to text, but that's not really what I wanted to focus on. I want to focus on this T. This layer is called a text layer. It's different from a normal layer in the fact that I can't paint on it. I really can't do a whole lot with it. I can change some aspects of it, but the text can still be edited if I wanted to go back and grab my text tool and come back and, like I did from Dookie to Ducky, I can edit the text. If I would need a layer that has text on it, but I want to manipulate it just like a regular layer would, all I would need to do is right-click on the text layer and come down to Rasterize Layer. What this does is it turns the text into pixels. And now you can see that it looks just like a regular layer, and you can even see, if you look hard enough, that there are pixels on this layer, and everything else is transparent. It's just a nice introduction to text. We're not done with Ducky, so let's focus back on him for a second. Remember I said that Ducky's looking a little bit too light here, and we want to kind of shade him up. Here's how I might do this. What's that? Okay. What I want to do is, in the Ducky set, I'm going to select Ducky and create a new layer so that my new layer appears above Ducky. Create the new set, or create the new layer, and we get layer 1. I'm going to double-click on this and call this Shadow. Gee, I cannot spell today to save my life. This is my shadow layer. There's nothing in it right now, but I want to use Ducky to create an area in here for a shadow of him. Now, remember how I went and grabbed my magic wand tool and created a selection area? I can actually recall a selection area around Ducky by clicking or holding down my control key and clicking on Ducky. Notice that my icon has changed into a hand with a little selection area around it, by holding down my control key and clicking on Ducky, automatically scours through this layer and says, okay, which parts has pixels? I'm going to create a selection area around that by itself. Good. I have a selection area now. I'm going to select the shadow layer.
While keeping the selection alive, right?
While keeping the selection alive. Right. Now, remember, only things inside the selection area is going to be affected. So what I want to do is to create a gradient, but this time I'm going to use, instead of foreground to background color, I'm going to use another one of those presets called foreground to transparent. Okay? I'm going to select foreground to transparent, close that down, grab my gradient tool, and this time, in this blank layer, I'm going to create a gradient. Aha! I'm still on my radial. I'm going to use a linear gradient and try that one more time. This is just the reverse of what I wanted to happen, so I'm going to do that again, but I'm going to hit the reverse. Boy, that's more like it. That's what I wanted. Let me show you now what that transparent from foreground to transparent did. I'm going to deselect this because I'm done with it.
So I noticed one thing. I just want to ask this question
Sure,
here. You had selected Ducky by control clicking on the Ducky layer.
Correct.
But I noticed that the black area, the shadow, is on the shadow layer. Did you have to do something special to get it on the shadow layer?
Absolutely nothing. Remember, selection areas are independent of layers. We can move these selections independently of what we do on the layer. So by me control clicking on Ducky, if Ducky was the selected layer, I would be affecting the pixels on the Ducky layer. But because I went up and selected shadow, I'm only going to affect the areas inside the shadow layer.
So it's kind of just like borrowing the selection from another layer and using it on a different one.
That's a good way of putting it.
Great.
Yeah, borrowing from one and using it on another. I'm going to deselect, Control D, just to show you what I've done. I'm going to turn off the visibility of Ducky real quick, just to show you that when I did a gradient from foreground to transparent, it literally took my foreground color, which was black, and made a gradient, a smooth transition between black to nothing. So this is what we get. I'm going to use this as my shadow, so I'm going to put Ducky back in and move this down just ever so slightly so that I don't get that white area at the bottom. I could use my my keypads, my up and down arrows, to move these pixel by pixel, as you can see there. Let's also talk about opacity for a second, because you see how my shadow is, it's good, but it's just too dark.
It's pretty dark.
Pretty dark. Up in the layers palette, we have a opacity level, which we have hinted at before. Anything that's 100% opaque, you can't see through it. It's like a brick wall. As we drop our opacity, it becomes more like rice paper. We become more transparent. So as I drop the opacity of that shadow, it in effect becomes lighter and lighter until I get a reasonable shadow. Okay, I'm going to leave it right about, say, maybe 67. Does that look a little bit better?
Looks pretty good.
Okay. You'd think we're done, but we're not. We're still going to use Ducky because we need to talk about how to do some masks. This is everybody's, masks are fun, masks are cool, add a lot of power, but sometimes it scares people away. So let's see if we can't create a mask with no pain involved, right? I'm going to recreate the Ducky layer, and how would I do that?
What exactly is a mask?
Okay.
Like a mask you'd put on your face and go to a Halloween costume party, or?
Nope. In Photoshop specifically, a mask is a way that we can manipulate the pixels on a layer by either showing visibility or not. It's a little bit complicated to describe, and I can show you very simply when I illustrate it, but it's actually a way of hiding pixels or showing pixels by using black and white. Did I get you confused?
No, not really. I pretty much have it. So it really kind of is like a mask you'd wear to a Halloween costume party. If you want to hide something, you put a mask on it.
Oh, well, in that case, yeah. Yeah, I see where your analogy was going. Absolutely. Thanks, Gump. Let me take Ducky here so we can illustrate this mask a little bit better. And I'm going to create an exact duplicate of this layer. How might I go about doing that? There's two ways we've talked about.
I'm going to go for right-click, duplicate.
We can choose right-click and duplicate the layer, or
you can drag it down onto the dog ear there
and then
duplicate
release, and it'll be created above what was previously selected. The Ducky copy. I'm going to call this, Ghost. I cannot, you know what? I don't care. I'll call it copy because I can't spell ghost. And I'm going to move this layer up to the upper corner, okay? But now he's the exact same size. I want to transform him to make him much larger. So again, I can go down from Edit to Free Transform or hit Control-T. I like hitting Control-T, so I'm going to hit that. Hold down my Shift key, remember, to constrain it to proportion. But notice how he's going to constrain to a proportion outward from the opposite side. If I hold down my Alt key simultaneously, not only does he constrain in a proportion, but he constrains outwardly on all sides.
Pretty much from the center, huh?
From the center. So I'm going to move him into place here and double-click. I'm going to go ahead and temporarily turn off the Ducky shadow and the drop shadow there just so we can isolate this one portion of our image and work on him. I want to add a mask to this copy. The mask button is down at the very bottom. We've talked about sets, creating a new layer, deleting a layer, and adding layer styles. The next one is the layer mask. By clicking on that, what we get in our layer is an extra area where we can create masks. Now notice my icon has changed. I'm going to go ahead and select on Ducky, and you can see that we have a little paintbrush. This means that this layer can be edited or painted on. Let me go ahead and get the tooltip on this. Indicates painting on layer or layer mask. If I click over here, the tooltip changes a little bit, and it says indicated painting on, it doesn't change. It just says layer mask this time. But the icon has changed. What this is indicating is we have selected the mask area and that we can go ahead and create a mask. Let me show you what it does by using your old favorite brush tool. By clicking a brush tool, masks use only black and white to create, to hide or show pixels, I should say.
So which one would more or less hide the pixels and which one would show the pixels?
Black is always going to hide pixels while white always shows pixels. So you can think of black as transparency, white as opacity.
Okay.
As I go ahead and using this layer mask, this is selected so I know that I'm going to be creating on the layer mask, I'm going to just draw my brush right over where Ducky is. Okay, and then when I release, you see this black blob here?
I see it.
Everywhere that I've created a black area over these pixels, those pixels become hidden. If I want to reveal those pixels, all I need to do is switch my foreground to background color or hit X on my keyboard to bring up white. Now, when I paint with white, I'm revealing those pixels. This is a fantastic way of editing an image without using the eraser tool so that you can always back up. Because once you use your eraser tool, you've killed those pixels. Using a mask, you can bring them back.
So you could almost use a black and white gradient to
Absolutely
do some things.
Could. Why don't we go ahead and do that? What I want to do is keep the top of Ducky visible and use a gradient to hide the lower portion. Making sure that I'm on my gradient here, or excuse me, on my mask. I'm going to pick that gradient tool again.
So you want Ducky's head to be seen, so your foreground color needs to be white and your background color would be black.
Exactly.
To hide the bottom of
Correct.
Ducky.
And since gradients make a smooth transition from one color to another color, if all white areas are visible and all black areas are transparent, we should get a nice, smooth step between the two of them.
Make sure to check your reverse.
Let me just make sure that reverse is on. You know what? Sometimes I just have to go mess it up to find out which direction it's going. So I'm going to start at the forehead and come down, and exactly, you went the opposite direction. So undo.
I think that's why Buzz tried to remind you about the reverse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we just don't listen to our students and Or
See,
our
that
instructors.
you guys picked on me in the last session, and now it's your turn, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm getting picked on now.
That does look really cool, though, with the black and white gradient going down, how you can really see that the top of Ducky's head has not changed at all, whereas the bottom of Ducky is really transparent.
Very transparent here at the bottom. And notice the mask, too. It reflects the same thing. From the white area, which is all visible, to the black area, which is all transparent, we've created that mask over Ducky.
And you drug that mask down, the gradient down at an angle, obviously, to get it that part of Ducky transparent.
Yes, I did, to create that kind of diagonal look. I created it. I drug it at a diagonal angle. Okay? Now, Ducky's nice. I'm going to put on the other layers here, increase the invisibility there. This Ducky in the background is nice, but he's just too bright. I want to lower the opacity of this layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click away from the mask and back onto the painting portion of this layer, and I'm going to drop the opacity a little bit to kind of push him into the background. We don't want him to be the focus of attention. We want the Ducky in the middle. So I'm going to drop the opacity of this particular duck into the back. Kind of get a hint. Okay? Now, what else can we do to this
We
image?
caused another problem. Can you see what it is?
No.
Look at the shadow on the front of the duck.
Oh, what we've done is we've put this into the wrong area. Let me go ahead and drag the duck underneath everything else so that he really is pushed into the... Oh, you're just talking about the visibility of the shadow. You see the shadow here? I had turned off the visibility, and I needed to turn it back on. You had me worried there.
There you go.
I was like, oh, it should be okay. I mean, it's transparent right there. You should be able to see through. But
Now you're feeling the way I was feeling. Now they're
I'm
picking
sweating.
on you.
Now you see how I feel all the time.
Yeah, I'm sweating. I think we're getting close to the final product here, right? Let me take one quick look at our Ducky image. Actually, I have it down here. And look how close we are.
That looks more like a cartoon.
This does. It looks a lot more like a cartoon. We can add... Now, it's not really cartoon shading, but we can actually make it look more like a cartoon shading by adding an image layer. Excuse me, an adjustment layer. I'm getting all tongue-tied. We're going to add an adjustment layer to turn this guy blue. Okay? I'm going to close him down again here. We're really, really close to being done. Actually, there is one more thing that I wanted to do to him. You see this reflection underneath Ducky? Let's go ahead and also recreate that on our image that we're creating here. Ducky is reflecting blue. We've got a drop shadow, but we also have a reflection. So let's try recreating that as well. Let's take Ducky, the Ducky layer again, and one more time, let's duplicate him. I like to drag it down there. And we're going to call this one Reflection. Reflection, enter. I don't know if I spelled it right, but there it is anyway.
Looks good to me.
Okay, we got Gump's approval. What I want to do is, because it's a reflection, it's obviously going to go in the opposite direction. So we're going to make sure that that layer is selected, go up to Edit, Transform, and the same thing we did with the shadow, I'm going to flip it vertical. Now we've got two Duckies sharing the same upside-down space. I'm going to hold my Shift key as I move so that I constrain it to an up and down direction. And I can position this once I get done so that he's inside my little shadow area. Now, we have some overlapping here. If I turn off that shadow again, you can see that the reflection is over the top of the other Ducky. I'm going to drag that reflection underneath the Ducky so it actually looks like he's cast from underneath. Too bright, once again. Let's drop the opacity down to something very, very low. Okay? But have you ever seen a reflection that's so perfect in your life? I haven't. This could use a nice mask on it, just like we did to the copy of Ducky up in the top. Let's create a mask real quick by clicking on the mask. The mask is selected. We'll go back to our gradient using foreground and background. I'm hoping my reverse direction is right this time. And I'm going to drag on there the reflection. And sure enough, everything that's black becomes hidden. Everything that's white is still visible. You know what? I'm going to undo it and do it just a little bit different this time. Off screen to make more of a smooth transition. Cool? Now, I've never seen a reflection that also is so perfectly smooth in all my life, so I'm going to do something a little dangerous and introduce you to a new part of the menu, or a new menu called filters. I'm going to choose filters because they're kind of like our special effects. Go down to blur and choose a Gaussian blur. There's blur, blur more, and Gaussian blur. Trust me, after you've used Gaussian blur, you'll never want to touch the blur and blur more. It gives you more precise control over our blur. This is our very first filter that we've used, and what I'm doing right now is selecting in this big preview area and dragging my image around using the mouse to click and drag.
I like how in Photoshop 7 you get a larger window there.
Good point. This is a much larger window in Photoshop 7 than you'd see in 6 and 5.5. We can actually zoom in and out of our image so that we can see what effects are being created. And we can change the radius of our blur. If I drop it down to 0.1 pixels, obviously not much blur is happening. As I bump it up, I'm going to get more and more of a blur until it's just out of control. So let's keep it somewhere down around maybe the 6 or 7 range. This preview button up here lets me see what's actually happening on screen. If I take that preview off, we don't get to see on screen what's actually being applied. I like to leave my preview button on so I can see and adjust the slider and get real-time effect. Cool? So I'm going to say OK to that. And in fact, I'm going to drop my opacity just a little bit more. Now there is a pretty good reflection, don't you
That
think?
looks pretty good.
We've got shadows, reflection, everything. What else are we missing? We're missing that wonderful color. How do we change Ducky to blue? We've talked about the garbage can or how to delete layers, create new ones, but we haven't touched yet on adjustment layers. Let's look at this little icon here. Clicking on that gives us a whole bunch of different types of layers that we can create. These are called adjustment layers. Okay? They're a way that we can add or adjust colors without affecting the layer itself. Okay? When we go into some of these things a little bit later on, you'll see, well, real quick, hue and saturation. Let me quickly come up to Ducky and show you that if I wanted to, I could change the color of Ducky by going up to Image, Adjust, Hue and Saturation, and then trashing the hue by dragging the slider all the way. We create the blue, right? That's what we want, but when I go OK, you can see that my Ducky layer has actually taken on that blue state. If I delete or undo that and use an adjustment layer that says Hue Saturation, I'm going to create a new layer above Ducky that's going to allow me to adjust the hue and saturation without actually affecting my Ducky layer. That's very, very handy in case you want to come back and tweak your hues or tweak your Ducky and not actually affect it at all. So I'm going to drop this hue all the way down to blue. Notice what happens to our background. I'm going to say OK to that. Now we have this new adjustment layer with hue saturation.
So it's affected all the layers underneath it as well, right?
Exactly, and I'm even stretching this out to show you that even in the studio set, our hue saturation has even affected the blue in our studio. Anything underneath these adjustment layers is going to be affected. Well, you can counterbalance the effects. But okay, yeah, it did adjust, but hey, we left all of our layers alone. We can come back and play with that again. If I double-click on that hue saturation icon there, I can adjust the slider at any time so that later on when I'm editing, I can go, oops, too blue, I want it pink. No, I don't. I'm going to say OK to that without actually, because you can't do that when you do it on to the actual image itself. If I come down to the shelf, select on that, and add a hue saturation adjustment layer to this one, I can do the reciprocal of what I just did by sliding that hue all the way to the opposite side. The first hue saturation slider I pushed to -180 all the way over. This other one is going to the reciprocal of that, which actually counters the effect of the first so that we can keep our shelf and studio blue the way we want it. Now I think I can show you the original document and show you that we're almost exactly the same, except for the blue in ours and the yellow in the original. Let's go ahead and correct that real quick. Why would the blue... Wait a sec. Which one's my original here?
The original is the one with the
here we go.
yellow big ducky.
I was looking for the layer, and I couldn't find it. The ducky with the big ducky is blue. Well, it happened because the big ducky is underneath our hue saturation adjustment layer. Let's grab this layer and put him above the hue saturation, and now we'll get Ducky back to his normal yellow state. Good? So I'd say we did a pretty good job of recreating the exact image. And hopefully, with this demonstration, you have a much better understanding of how to use layers.
Hooray!
Yay.
Looks
I'm
pretty
a pro
good.
now.
Very good job. Very good job. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything we want to talk about for an introduction to layers.